Money FM 89.3, the best of the afternoon update. Viewpoint.
You know, I am persona non grata as far as the government is concerned. Anybody who comes close to me gets punished. And even if I make a suggestion that may be useful, because it comes from me, that will be rejected.
He's been called a statesman, a strongman, a visionary, and a polarizing figure. Malaysia's longest-serving Prime Minister, Dr Mahathir Mohamad, turns 100 years old today, but he still hasn't stopped thinking about what he called the Malay Dilemma more than 50 years ago. A fascinating feature about Dr M's centenary and his unfinished business with Malaysia is up on the Straits Times website, straitstimes.com, along with a video, and we're joined today by Shannon Teoh, Malaysia Bureau Chief at the Straits Times, and the writer of that piece. Shannon, thanks for making time for us.
No problem. A good day to have you as well. He turns 100 exactly today.
Yes. And Shannon, first off, you sat down with Dr M for the interview to mark his 100th birthday. What struck you the most when you were putting this story together, talking about a man who's lived through a century, right, and shaped so much of Malaysia?
I think there was a sense of occasion, definitely. I mean, without denigrating him, he's not as relevant politically today as when we did any of our previous interviews, when he was leading the opposition against Najib Razak, when he was Prime Minister again, things like that. This time, it wasn't so much about this is Mahathir, but this is Mahathir, he's reaching 100, right? And I think there was a sense of going into the interview and trying to pick at his brain. And it's funny because, he started off the interview also talking about how he still gets a lot of people asking him for advice, trying to tap onto his experience. He's become a kind of, and I mentioned it in the story, a kind of emeritus advisor to everyone, right? This kind of institutional knowledge and memory of Malaysia sitting in front of you, embodied in this person.
So what struck you? Has much changed?
Well, he looks a bit older than
of course.
the first time I interviewed him. But he doesn't look unhealthy, And, I mean, let's be fair. Even if he was on a wheelchair and hooked up to a machine or something, at the age of 100, you still say that he's done pretty well, right? I mean, I don't know if any of us listening to this right now is going to live up to 80 or even 90. But here's a guy who can walk around the room. He's fine. He's into the office bright and early. We were early there to set up at about 8:45. But he was already at work, right? Looking through papers, rifling through documents. It's just a picture of vitality.
So is he as sharp and as combative as we remember?
I think that he's still got the turns of phrases, the same caustic humor, sometimes even self-deprecating. His hearing is not as good as it was before, but I think that's expected. But there's nothing to suggest that he doesn't understand what's going on around him, right? It's not a sense of an old man who is, starting to drift off a bit. He's very engaged. He knows why we're there, what we want from this interview, and he's happy to give you a piece of his mind.
And in your article, I gather that he talks about he keeps coming back to the same theme, how to strengthen and unify the Malay community. Why is this still so important to him?
Well, okay, so the questions did lead down that path, and we touch on many different topics as well. But I think it's something that he can talk about with a lot of colour, no matter when or where, is because it's one of the things that is kind of his lifelong mission in politics. Now, you mentioned the Malay Dilemma. That was written in 1970. That was more than half a century ago, more than half his life ago. And we don't say that about many things, right? That it existed more than half of Mahathir's life ago. And when he left power the first time, and he resigned in 2003, that was one of the things that he said that he was most disappointed and not achieving. By the time he ended 22 years as Prime Minister, that he was not able to get Malays to change their mindset, right? And to become as competitive in economic fields as, well, I mean, obviously as Chinese Malaysians, they mentioned. And so for him, part of the equation is that the Malay community has to be united as well to go and achieve these gains and to grow and to increase their capacity. He does link those two concepts together. Malays improving themselves, but also at the same time being united. And so he expresses concern all the time about how, while Malays are the majority in Malaysia, but their allegiances, that is political allegiances, are split between 5 and 6 different parties.
So does he see this as the biggest obstacle to national unity and strength?
Well, I think he has a few bugbears. This is one, but the other being that he looks around the region and he looks at maybe migrant communities in the Philippines, in Thailand, in Indonesia, and says that they've assimilated much better than they have in Malaysia. In Malaysia, every different community keeps a lot of its own culture, right? They clearly very identify as Chinese Malaysian or Indian Malaysian, so on and so forth. If you were to go to Thailand, yes, you would still see Thai Malays in Thailand, right, with dressing a certain way. Chinese in Thailand still, expressing themselves through a certain culture. But they're all very much Thai. They have Thai names. They all speak Thai. If you were to, and you use this example, if you were to hear an Indonesian voice, you won't know the face until you turn around and look at it. But in Malaysia, when you hear a voice speaking, even in Malay, you can tell whether it's Chinese person speaking Malay or a Malay person and stuff like that. So one of the things here is the integration that he's talking about. He's not suggesting, I think, to completely not be Chinese or not be Indian, but the level of integration just isn't enough.
Shannon, but Dr. M's critics would say his policies are the very thing that created some of the very divisions he now complains about. So how do you think he would respond to that?
Well, he's still at the end a man who believes that his policies are correct, and that if there were shortcomings, then it is not because he had a kind of toolkit to deal with it, but there was no better solution. So when he talks about even things like the NEP and the pro-Bumiputra affirmative action, he keeps going back to the fact that there is wealth disparity, there is an income gap, and there is no better solution. So that's why we continue with these policies. So I think he would say the same thing about how Malaysians are not that integrated. And he would say that, well, I tried to have people come to the same schools, but the Chinese educationists say that, no, we must have vernacular schools, it is all right. Right? So I would say that he would probably say that, yes, I had the ideas, I had wanted to push through certain policies, but people didn't want to follow what I said or what I suggested. And which comes back, I think, to the intro of the article. And he had this tongue-in-cheek comment about maybe one of his flaws is that I don't communicate very well.
Okay, let's listen to a clip from that video in which you spoke to him.
You have to remain active. You must not do nothing. Sit down and just do nothing. That is bad for your health. You see, the body and the mind functions well if you use the body and the mind. If you don't, the body tends to regress, becomes weaker. If you don't use your brain, it begins to regress, begins to forget things, cannot remember anything, cannot recognize things, and all that. So I keep my mind active all the time. Being interviewed by you is one of the activities that I am involved in. And I read, I write, I talk with people, I give lectures. So keep the brain active all the time.
Wow, he's been keeping busy, huh? Still sounds very sharp, I think.
Yeah, and I'm glad to have played a part in keeping him in good shape, I guess.
Okay, what's he really like up close at 100?
Well, I mean, you can tell that, and I mentioned that you can tell that he is an old man, right? He talks a bit slower, is a bit hard of hearing. But I think when he articulates himself, it is not like you're speaking to your grandfather, right? It doesn't feel like that at all. It does still feel like he has the ability to surprise you with his answers and with his train of thought. So I do feel that if I could interview him week after week, I would learn something new, I would gain something new. I think that's why a lot of people who are writing books, academics, they do go and seek interviews with him to kind of get his perspective on historical events, right? And he's been around for so long. Someone was mentioning how he survived the Second World War, and also how many more Malaysians you have from that age who are now operating at such a lucid and high level. So to me, it was a case of, again, this is another interview in a different context. Mahathir is not within the corridors of power, as it were, but there's still something to be learned from that 1 hour we had with him.
Did you sense that he had any regrets? Maybe a sense of unfinished business?
Oh, yeah. I mean, so he's still working now to kind of unite the Malays, right? He's founded last month, along with other Malay politicians, something that is called like the Malay People's Secretariat Committee or something like that. And it's meant to, and as he was mentioning, Malays are now divided politically, but we should have an umbrella body that brings them together on common interests, not on political grounds. So that's one of it. Another thing that he did express regret was he said that he regrets resigning in 2003. And he said that, well, he never thought he would survive past 75. And by the time it was 2003, he was 78. And he was thinking, by the time the next election is due, I'm going to be 80 years old. I can't be Prime Minister at 80 years old. Of course, we know that famously he came back to be Prime Minister at the age of 93 to 95. So I guess that's where the regret comes from. He could have gone on a bit longer. And in his mind, of course, I think he believes that the longer he has stayed, the closer Malaysia would have been to Vision 2020, right? His idea that Malaysia can be a developed country. And he describes the time between 2003 when he stepped down to 2020 as 17 wasted years. And he accuses his successors of not focusing on growing the economy.
Shannon, thanks for sharing your perspective. 100 years and still one of Malaysia's most fascinating and I would say still controversial figures. Your piece, well, it's a great read and I recommend everyone check it out on straitstimes.com. Thanks again, Shannon.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, that was Shannon Teoh, Malaysia Bureau Chief at the Straits Times on his feature marking Dr Mahathir Mohamad's 100th birthday and his lifelong preoccupation with Malay Dilemma. You've been listening to Viewpoint on Money FM 89.3.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.